Hey, y'all. It is your girl, Shea, here with you. If you're down with me, you know me as Chelsea, and we are back, y'all. I am super excited, and it is so good to be back. For those that do and don't know, this is my second annual event series that celebrates and acknowledges National Minority Mental Health Month. Now, last year was an incredible success, considering we had some amazing people on board and behind the scenes, including non-for-profits, national foundations, and private and public HBCUs and universities, such as Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science and Black Girls Code, and the Epilepsy Foundation of Florida, and the Michael Anthony Foundation. So I am so excited to have a second go-round of this series. So make sure to find all the links on my Instagram page at Shea Lanin, and all of our upcoming events following this one there as well. And lastly, before we actually get into the first episode of our 2021 series, do not forget to share, like, and follow. Pretty please. Now, second little addition. Do not forget to, if you can and if you will, that your gifts can be sent to my Cash App pin below at ShayBella7. And they will be split with today's feature and my college fund if they so choose. Now let's get to it. Today, our feature will be an archivist of a future African past and present time, undergraduate of the South African School of Motion Picture Media, a former copy and scriptwriter, and award-winning artist, Tsoku Maela, who with me will be exploring the title, The Healing Power of Art. Let's add him to the stream. Hello, Tsoku.
Hello, how are you, Shea?
I'm very good. How are you feeling today?
Very good. I imagine it's pretty early for you. How are you feeling?
Good. It's 8:02. No worries.
8:02? Not too early? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's like I think it's like 2 p.m. for us here. So I've had enough time to kind of just like enjoy the morning, relax a little bit. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm really excited to get into this conversation with you.
Awesome. We love hearing it. And don't mind the lawnmower in the background.
So good.
But ain't nothing better than Black girl, Black man, Black woman joy on the Shea Lanin platform this morning. So I'm glad to hear that. But today, we will be speaking on a variety of topics that are all essentially in regards to the minority community. You can see them in the caption listed below the original flyer on my IG homepage. So let's simply get started with what is Minority Mental Health Month, right? What does it mean? What do we bring awareness to for some 31 days, right? So Minority Mental Health Month brings awareness to the unique, and I mean unique, struggles that underrepresented groups face in regards to mental illness in the U.S. And it became formally recognized back in 2008 and by our team here as early as July of last year. So here's what's funny, everybody. Our feature is all the way in South Africa, right? And we're recording over here at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're there, as you said, it's 2 in the afternoon.
2 p.m., yeah, that's correct.
And I did not want to have y'all waking up at 5 a.m. in Los Angeles, if you're in Los Angeles, 6 a.m. Pacific time, and 7 a.m. up in Mountain Time. Regardless, we're here. And this episode is going to be recorded. And Tsoku is here. We're excited for this first episode of our second annual series. So if you are up to it, drop your time zone and your favorite emoji if you're excited for the first episode. All right? So let's get really serious, really quick. A quick disclaimer, this series is not meant to associate or assume mental illness or general issues on or with anyone, but instead it's simply an open discussion regarding how we as a community are affected by the societal and historical factors that come into play when we talk about the significance of mental health. All right? So now, let's just go about these questions. Tsoku, feel free to tell the viewers about yourself, your birthplace, your workplace, your inspiration. How'd you get into art?
Yeah, so my name is Tsoku Maela, as you've already said on the show. I'm currently based in South Africa. Well, I was born in South Africa. I was raised in South Africa, and I work between 3 different cities here. I work between Cape Town, where I did the majority of my studies and pretty much lived half of my life, and Johannesburg as well, where the other part of my family lives at, and the Limpopo, where I was born, where I'm currently residing in with my mom during the pandemic, just making sure that she's taken care of and that she's healthy and she's strong. But how did I get into the arts? That's such a how much time do we have? How do I get into the arts? Um, I suppose a lot of people don't really know this about my story is that I actually come from the scientific background. I went to varsity to study microbiology when I left high school, and shortly after that, due to my struggles with depression, which was pretty peak in my final year of molecular biology, I found myself having to sort of like make a life change, like life decisions on what I was going to do with my life, because there was just no way I was going to complete my studies in molecular biology at the rate my depression was going. It was pretty intense, and it was a new experience for me, being a black child living in the Western Cape, where we hardly ever spoke about issues of mental health in my community back at home. So I wasn't really sure what I was dealing with, what the experience was. So as a result, I had little to no support around me in the form of psychologists or psychiatrists, or just like mentorship about what I was going through. So I eventually found myself leaving in my final year, literally 6 months before my final exam. I remember this clearly, making a phone call to my mom, standing on Jameson Stairs at UCT. If you Google it, you'll see it's like if you've watched the film, is it Rocky or something, where the box is going up this flight of
Yeah.
stairs, with Eye of the Tiger playing in the background. Those are literally the same kind of stairs we had. And I remember making a phone call to my mom one night after coming out of the library, telling her that like I don't think I'm gonna be able to pull through. It's either my academia or my life at this point. That's how bad it was. And she was cool with it. She was like, okay, cool. What are you gonna do with your life then? This has been your plan your whole life. This has literally been the only thing you've wanted to do with your life. I said, well, I write as well. I'm very good as a writer. I'm decent as a writer. I'm good with words when I'm writing, not talking clearly. But she's like, okay, cool. We'll fund you if you think you can make it happen. We'll fund half of your tertiary studies if you can show us that you can actually pull the other half together and pull through. And that's what I did. I got into the film school that you've mentioned, the South African School of Motion Picture Medium, where I don't know, I was really exposed. I was exposed to a new world altogether. It was a new process for me. You know what I mean? I come from a scientific background. Everything has a process, everything has data, everything has nuance, everything can sort of be mapped. Whereas at this university, I mean, everybody was just this free soul that had so much time to talk about films and talk about creativity. And I'm just like, where are the textbooks? Where's the other stuff? Where are the tutorials? Where are the practicals? We're filmmakers, right? But it really opened my life up to a different way of problem solving. Outside of the scientific field, I mean, creativity is about solving problems, and filmmakers and creatives that are telling stories are essentially trying to solve a lot of societal issues through hyper realism and hyper dramatizing the situations that we live in. And so as a writer, I learned how to think, um I don't know, as an artist that solves problems. So the institution wasn't a complete waste of my time as I thought it would be. It equipped me with a lot of incredible skills, how to write better, how to tell stories that connect with people. And I think that's the reason my photography has had so much resonance with so many people across the world, because it's stories that connect with them, even though I've never met them before or I've never experienced their culture before. It's like it just connects with them. And I'm very grateful for the university for like instilling that in me, being able to teach me and be like, this is how you can do it. But it also opened my world up to other mediums, like the visual mediums of cinematography, visual effects, editing and directing. I was just like really enthralled by all of it. Like, I'm a tech geek as well at times, so it was really cool to just have all these programs around me. I was on YouTube like 7 hours a day learning how to like edit, how to like, I don't know, just like I was just learning as much as I could. But eventually things just got like really hectic in my life, where I had to sort of make money somehow, for me to stay in the university. So I had to decide how I was going to balance that work life situation. And luckily for me, the university, my final year, actually made script writing as a major. So you could only do script writing if you were majoring in directing previously. So they made it its own major. And I was like, thank God for that, because I could just major in script writing and work the rest of the day, which is what I basically did. I was waking up on couches, taking a train, going to class. Literally, like, that was my grind, 9 to 5 every single day, working in the industry with a couple of my friends that ran production companies, and we're shooting work already. And I'd be working with them until like 4 in the morning, crashing on their couches, waking up, taking a train, going to class the next day, sitting in a lecture, telling me how to do the stuff I just did. So it was like, it was a wild experience. And I mean, from there on, I mean, I remember telling my mom that I needed a camera, because I felt like I was falling behind with all the other kids. I mean, I'm not gonna mince my words. I never really do. There were mostly white kids that had a lot of money at this private institution, and I felt like they had all the equipment. They had sound equipment, they had video equipment. So like during the weekends while we were revising the information we got from class, they were shooting, and getting practical knowledge on how to do this stuff. So I asked my mom if she could meet me halfway to buy this camera, and she did. She helped me buy this camera, but I later realized that like it's not the best camera to be doing film work on, so I could hardly shoot any video on it. But a year later, that became a blessing in disguise, because that's when I started shooting still images. Trying to tell full stories in a single image was kind of how I saw it. It's like I can't afford to make a film, but we all know that every second of film, I mean, every minute of film, I mean, every second of film is like 24 frames or 60 frames, or depending on what you're shooting. So I was like, if I can tell you a whole story in a single frame, consider it a whole film, right? So that's why I started in 2014, 2015, taking self-portraits in my bedroom. Yeah, and literally that's how I got into it. Just from there on, I've been shooting ever since,
That is something else. Okay, so it's Maela.
Maela, yeah. Like paella, Maela like paella is what I always say.
Okay, I got you. But when it comes to a few things resonate with you just speaking now is I'm currently a dual enrollment student, so I'm taking my high school classes and college classes dually at the same time. And Valencia College it's a community college, so it's very tight knit, less kids, but still a lot of work. So right now it's like what is it? My first finance project doing principles of finance. I had my 3 case studies due just this month with intro to business. So that definitely resonated. But I'm hoping after these 2 years with the program, to go to NYU, which is exactly the type of environment that you would describe, which is very artsy. And I visited it, I think sometime this year. But you have like the park, Central Park, and everybody's skating, or they're like singing, or just like absolutely just vibing overall.
Right.
I'm like, that's where I want to be. But yet they're very studious at the same time. They could just crack down at the same time. So I'm like, that's exactly what I'm striving for. And the idea with pictures, I'm not professional like you at all whatsoever. When it comes to just taking pictures of family and friends in the moment, that's definitely something I cherish. It's like just those seconds of, wow, they were doing so much more than like a reunion, really.
I mean, that's what it's all about. If you're gonna do photography, that's what photography. I think social media has turned, the visual arts into a different phenomena. It's like if you're a photographer, you need to realize that what you're doing is documenting time and space, and these are vulnerable spaces that you're in. These intimate spaces. The fact that you're able to photograph your family, that's an intimate thing. If you're photographing somebody in the street, that's a power struggle between 2 different experiences and 2 different people. So it's like on social media, this becomes a whole other conversation. It's about aesthetics. It's about like, what it looks like. Basically what it looks like, who took the photo and what it looks like. But photography is essentially what it's about, documenting history and time as it happens. And there's no level of there's no level you can get to where you're a professional or like you're an amateur, where your work does not really resonate. Like as long as it's important to you. Like one of my favorite photographers of all time, Henri Latique, is a French photographer. He considered himself to be a professional amateur. This is somebody whose work got picked up in his 50s or 60s. And like right now, I mean, he's massive. Even though he's passed on, he's massive, like to the historical canon of photography, not because he was trying to become a professional photographer, but because he was he was an anthropologist of sorts. He was interested in people's livelihoods and lives, like Cartier-Bresson is another one who is one of my favorite street photographers. Pretty much the same thing, it's just about being present and documenting people's lives as beautifully as you possibly can. So don't worry about your level of whether you're a professional or not. You, as long as it's important to you and the people around you, it's gonna be wonderful. It's gonna be good.
Yes. All right.
Yeah.
So I'm a professional then. Okay.
There you go. Professional amateur. You're good. You got it.
Perfect. And then let me see, because this is going to be a topic that we're also going to explore today. The faith shouldn't be a substitute for care. Faith is a
Right.
great thing, and I can say that from my own personal belief system, being Christianity. However, in addition, let me say that faith should be a substitute for care. We're going to talk about how Black churches can do better to support and educate their audience on mental health, and suggest resources to support their audience further, just in general. So one question that I will pose to you before we actually get into the different parts that we have for this show would be, how can you balance passion, so your passion for art or just your passion and general interest, with prescriptions, if that makes sense? So how can you just make sure I've got this? Let me see. So not to overwhelm yourself with your passions, but still prioritize your self-care.
Right. So how to balance your passions with your, as you call them, prescriptions, is that what you called it?
Yes.
Interesting.
Medicine.
So I mean, I'm probably not the best person to ask on this, because I have turned my passion into a livelihood as well. So and that's a debate that's ongoing between myself and my peers, whether or not that's a good thing or not. So the way I see passions, and I can only speak from my perspective. Again, I'm going to try to speak as much as I can from my perspective. I don't want to make any umbrella sort of like assumptions on people's lives and experiences. So the way I've experienced it is, my passions have often been spaces, like safe spaces. Yeah, they've been spaces of release. They've been spaces where I've been able to confront things that I've never really had the space in the social space to do so. So generally, I would say, if you have the option not to turn those safe spaces into like the way you make a living or your life, by all means keep it separate if you can. But it's always beneficial, I find, that if your passions are somehow aligned with some sort of servitude towards the community at large, it'll never you'll never really find yourself in a space where you're not in balance or in sync, because you're in conversation with other people's needs and experiences, and you're constantly learning. And I think it's through that process where you learn when to make yourself available, or when to sort of like keep to your own space and environment. It's sort of like a process that teaches you how to grow up, how to have a better grasp of an appreciation of your own mental and emotional space. And maybe this is something we'll get into during the conversation when it comes to issues of self-care, maybe. But yeah, I don't really have like an in-depth answer to that, because it's again very subjective. It's something that's going to be very subjective from person to person. But the one thing I'd always say is, try not to overstretch yourself. You know what I mean? Try not to become something to someone before you learn who you are. Basically, you don't want to assume a role. Like when I started, like when I released abstract pieces in 2016, I wasn't expecting the global response that we received from it. Like we're getting phone calls from everyone left, right, and center. The New York Times, like famous actors, whatever. Like we're just getting so many people. And like I think I found myself at a crossroads where it was like, am I am I gonna become like a mental health activist? Like I don't really understand my own mental illness and mental health at fully. I don't think I'm ready to sort of like take that on. Whereas people in my life were like, yo, do this, this might be good for your career. I wasn't thinking about careers. I was thinking about actual lives and people's lives, my life as well, how that's going to impact my life. If I'm going to serve the community, I need to learn how to heal myself, before I can talk to other people about healing themselves. I need to learn what this journey is trying to teach me, what my mental health and my experience with mental illnesses is trying to teach me, before I could tell other people, yo, let's come together and try to do this. Because you could do more harm than good in those spaces. Yeah, you could do more harm in those spaces when you're trying to be a do-gooder. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question of finding balance, but just at some point, as like trying to always understand your internal environment before trying to speak to other people's experiences, I think is super important.
Yes, that's most definitely a conflict with teens and myself, and just wanting to commit to somebody else and to a relationship before even knowing yourself and your body and your mind.
Correct.
So I strongly suggest for our viewers to simply ponder. You don't have to comment, but simply ponder on a time when you committed or attempted to commit yourself to something before you were ready or before you knew yourself, and how you can begin that process in knowing yourself.
Yeah.
And we'll also speak on that today. So there are 3 parts, pardon me, to this episode. African Americans and Africa 101, the Black experience, 4 parts, yes. African Americans in Africa 101, the Black experience, the stigma and mental health in Black art. Now, 22 minutes have already passed in conversation. So I can only imagine how long we'll run, but I will most definitely respect your time, and I'll say almost 120 minutes would be the estimate. So let's begin with African Americans in Africa 101. So the question arises, what did the term or identifier African Americans come from, right? And what relationship does African American have to do with Africa and vice versa, if at all? So identifiers first are terms that you've heard for sure thrown around in speeches or lectures or conversations or just everyday dialogues, right? So you have Negro, African, colored, Afro-American, African-American, and Black are identifiers that reflect the variety of ways African Americans have identified themselves, at least in the US, since forcibly landing on American shores in the 17th century. So these identifiers have a relationship to a country or continent that resonates with individuals' identity, either personally, ancestrally, or politically. So Tsoku and I, if I may say, were personally born and raised in different countries and hence have different experiences as a Black man and woman. So me being born in America, more specifically Manhattan in the state of New York, and Tsoku in the Limpopo province of South Africa, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what do these identifiers, more specifically African Americans, have to do with the continent of Africa? And how can we break African American further down to see the rifts that it's made, right? So if we were to take a glance on Black history, we would see the following. The level of identification and interest towards Africa varied geographically in the 18th century. So you would see enslaved African Americans in the South sought to maintain their traditions, while African Americans in the North hoped to integrate into the American polity, So additionally, the negative images of Africa that were posed to America, coupled with racist scholarship and the weaponized usage of Christianity, made some African Americans avoid African identification overall. So though slavery exacerbated that disconnection with their ancestral homelands, African Americans developed unique traditions rooted in their African ancestry, though they were not regarded as African. And then we can fast forward to the mid 20th century, where you see many African Americans that were politically identified with Africa, and they began to express interest in the continent's uplift during Africa's decolonization and the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And we'd further see that this political identification would reflect the recognition of the global subordinate position of people of African descent. Now that's just a basic overview, and if you'd like to explore it yourself, then we can actually provide links at the end of this episode, pardon me. But now I want to hear your side, so cool, concerning the Black experience as it is in your country. And the second part of our show, and then move on to the second part of our show that analyzes the rift that exists between Africans and African Americans.
Sure. I mean, Where do I begin with the black experience in South Africa? It's I mean, right now we are living during a time of civil unrest because of the differences and the difference in cultures and understandings. But I'm not gonna get into that. It's a whole other political issue. But the history of South Africa in itself, I think much like American history, whenever people learn about it from school, tends to have this very silly assumption that it began with colonialism. So like our history, like there's this running joke that our history didn't begin in 1652, which is when the Dutch first settled in Cape Town, or on yeah, when they got to Cape Town for the trade. um but our history is a very colonial one, unfortunately, because some of the issues that we're still dealing with today, whether that's from a spiritual perspective, whether that's from a mental perspective or physiological perspective as well, which I guess I can touch on a bit later, how those three could be interconnected in issues of mental health and mental illnesses, is unfortunately a colonial one. It's we live in a country that has about 11 different languages. Do you know what I mean? We speak 11 official languages. I want to add sign language as a 12th, because I believe it should be a recognized language as well. But you're looking at multiple ethnic groups, different cultures, different subcultures. So we're talking about a country that is in its 27th year of democracy, which is a very young democracy in my opinion, given that we still haven't figured out a lot of the other issues, the underlying issues, health issues, education. There's just so much that we're dealing with on top of like the historical trauma of apartheid, which is what you guys will know it as. But I mean, I've recently just been staying with my mom for a little bit, which I haven't been doing my whole life. And she's somebody that lived during those times, so her experiences of the different paradigm shift as well is very different. So the black experience here is is still something we're trying to figure out. It's a rich one. Don't get me wrong. We have beautiful cultures. We have beautiful histories, and it's those histories that I'm actually trying to focus more on as pathways to our healing in the future. That's something I'm hoping to get into when I start my master's in September, my medical anthropology master's. So it's like trying to focus more on like how our histories, which have been hidden from us and been taken away from us, how we can use those histories in terms of like learning about ourselves, subverting all those other identifiers. Like there's Negro in the United States. Yeah, we have kafir here, which is the equivalent of Negro and the other versions of the N word. So how to subvert all those identities and all the assumptions that follow with it, identities that were bestowed upon us by people that want to subjugate us. It's not coming from us. It's coming from people outside of our communities. So we're still in a place where we're trying to learn about what the black experience actually is, where we're trying to define it. My generation is trying to define that outside of colonial lines. That's why we're coming through with our creativity. That's why we have so many new writers. We have so many new stories that are being told. We're global citizens. Me and you are able to connect because of that energy. So we're really trying to redefine what the black experience is. But in doing so, we're also learning by meeting other people, like you saw from the States, for example, that the black experience in the States is actually not that different from ours here. Politically, it's not that different. I've been following the development of Black Lives Matter for a while now, and we have the same issue here, except that we're being shut down by black officers. So it's like a different race, but like same political issues, social political issues that we're dealing with. There's also still a lot of like exclusion from spaces, either academically or just like socially. Just like either they tell you verbatim that you can't be here, or like they price you out economically. So like gentrification still happens here for people of color. So we have just to be clear, we have black people here that identify as black. I would be identified as a black person here. And then we have colored people here. Yeah, in the States, colored people used to refer to black people historically, and it's now seen as a derogatory term. But in South Africa, we have a group called colored people who have their own history as well. Some people argue that they're a mixture between black and white, but like I know definitely like it's not always the case. There's also a history there with colored people, so we have that as well. But like their experience politically is one that could also be framed under the black experience, because historically they've experienced similar issues as we have, dealing with colonialism as well. So we are finding that the Black experience between people in the States, or whether people of color in, I've got a few friends from the Dominican Republic, for example, and like I'm hearing similar stories. So like I've got like people from Latin America that are talking to me about like the person of color experience or Black experience in their countries, and it's like pretty similar to ours here. It's almost like you can't ignore the long arm of capitalism conflated with colonialism. No matter where you go, it functions pretty much the same way to try and subjugate a certain group of people. And Black people in South Africa are not a minority group, by the way. We're 80% of this country. Yeah, so like there's so many of us compared to other races, but we're still under the political conversation, still subjugated historically and currently. So many ways, so it's something we're still trying to figure out, but we as the new artists, we as the new voices are trying not to repeat the historical tropes of trauma and pain. We're actually trying to like find solutions. We're trying to heal, we're trying to move on forward. We're not trying to we know what happened historically, we know what happened, we have holidays that commemorate those histories. We're not about that life though. We want to change our environments and our communities, and that's why we do community work. That's why we focus with the youth. We try to help them to see a better life, a different life, instead of just be like, remember when the colonialists did this to us? It's like, we know what happened, we know it's cool, but what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do? We're more proactive now, and so we're trying to change our destinies, if I could use that word. We're trying to change our destinies, like by being very proactive, using our arts, whatever you can. We try to use that to change the Black experience, so that's just a long-winded answer, I suppose, to kind of like give you a picture. But very beautiful people, I must say, very beautiful people here, very energetic youth. So I'm really excited for the future of this country, even though the current climate may not suggest that there's anything to be optimistic about. I remain fairly optimistic about it because I've seen the creative energy coming out of here. Yeah, I remain very optimistic about it.
It's wonderful, and you hit it on the head. But one thing that was outstanding, or is outstanding, is that we know what the Black experience at least consists of. We don't know what it is. That was pretty deep, because at least we do know what it consists of. At least here, it's like there's a whole array of experiences that fall under it. Just having to be pulled over, and police brutality and microaggressions, and the list goes on. We don't exactly know its definition, So that's something to ponder on, and to address next. Pardon me, is that existing rift between these two ethnicities. And it could really take up the whole duration of this episode, but again, we're at 34 minutes. So to be brief, for a long period of time, there's been that long existing history of an unfathomable and silently raging rift between Africans and African Americans, or Afro-Americans, as some now refer. And it should be noted that the relationship between these two races can never really be erased or forgotten, even though there seems to be a discouraging high level of oftentimes historical ignorance or lack of in-depth understanding. And you even mentioned that, I recognize in an interview, you said, when it comes to at least mental health, that it's not ignorance sometimes, but rather just us not knowing,
Yeah, absolutely.
So it can really be stemmed to those two. And what we'll provide to our viewers today is that understanding and perspective. And so that warrants a brief trip down memory lane to refresh some existing knowledge on the subject. So the first reason to consider is the comparison debate between Africans and African Americans about who have suffered or continuously suffer the most. So we'll begin by considering the latter's historical slavery struggles. I know we keep going back to colonialism, but that's really the pinpoint that we'll reference to. So pardon me.
Can't escape it.
Like, we just talked about this, but listen, okay, do this research on your own. Again, we'll provide the links at the end. So yes, the latter historical slavery struggles, it's most definitely spilled over and transformed into the present day inequality and inequity that we continually forced to endure. And history has clearly made us realize that the dehumanizing and disheartening low level of inhumane treatment and conditions that we have to go through and had gone through before the abolition of slavery. And it's no longer news that this present American structure and system is continuously finessed to favor Caucasians who are a majority over the minority Blacks. So with this understanding, some African Americans always see African immigrants as some things and vice versa. But the fact remains that both ethnicities have endured a hell of a lot, from racism to colorism to incarceration to enslavement and so much more. And so that provides us with the perfect transition to our third segment, being art as remedy for mental health in fighting the mental health stigma. So we have a few subunits here: the artist purpose, stigma, and solutions, because that's what we're all about, what you just mentioned here. This whole generation, we're not going to just talk about the struggles of the Black people. No, we're going to offer some solutions, some tangible solutions that you can actually take home, rewind, hold, etc. All right.
Correct.
So let's talk about Black artists, and fighting Black stigma. So I see here, actually, the question I'll pose to you, a simple rhetorical question. What is the stigma that surrounds Black mental health?
Well, I first have to make this disclaimer that, like, in all the years that I've been doing my research and doing my talks and like just taking time to understand stigma and mental health or mental illnesses, stigma is ubiquitous across racial lines. I just have to get that out there ASAP. If there's anybody that's listening that's not Black or African American or is just Caucasian straight up, like, we're not in any way trying to exclude anybody from the conversation here. It's just that it's the responses that are different to stigma within these different cultures, if you will. And like you've said it perfectly, is that for us it's not a matter of ignorance, really. It's a matter of like not knowing enough. And I think historically, if you think about in the African context anyway, where I'm in the African continent, I can't speak for the States because it's a first world country, yeah, so like you guys might have a different perspective to that, but here we have so many different demographics, social classes. So the Black experience historically with mental health or mental illnesses has always come from a perspective that like it makes you weak, or you're bewitched, or like you're incapable of being a normal human. It's equated to the word crazy. Unfortunately, the word crazy, there's just no way to sugarcoat it. If somebody calls you crazy in our culture, sometimes it's just the worst thing they could call you. You know, you're not a functional human. So one of the biggest contributors to stigma, besides not being informed, I find, is a language barrier. Like I said, we have 11 different languages here. One of them is English. The other one is Afrikaans. The rest are like Afrikaans is considered an African language. I'm not gonna get into the semantics of that situation. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but like in our African languages, what I find often, I've done this survey many a times during my talks as well, where like I'll start my presentation by taking a quick survey of the room, like how many people in here speak an African language, whether from South Africa or like beyond the borders in the African continent. And like usually like 90%, 99% of the room raises their hands quite enthusiastically because, yeah, you're very proud to speak an African language. Happy days. And then you ask them how many of them in their language, in that same home language, know a word for depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, or like, do you have any of those words? And like all of them go down. Every single one of them goes down. So no one has a word for depression, anxiety. What we have a word for, unfortunately, is crazy, and that only means one thing. So in the communities that Black people used to grow up historically with colonialism as well, before, during, and after colonialism, it's like if somebody was crazy, that meant some other supernatural event was happening with them. That was God, punishing them for something. It's a disability that nobody wanted to accept. And when colonialism came along, it introduced a different way of dealing with that, which is it brought Western psychiatry to Africa, which isn't the way Africans were dealing with mental illnesses back then. Unfortunately, due to having no records of how traditional healers were dealing with mental illnesses, we don't know the efficacy of their approaches, how successful they were. There was no documentation of it, and when you were visiting a traditional healer, it was usually kept hush hush because there was other connotations were happening there. So during colonialism, it became far worse in that, like, visiting traditional healers was seen as a form of witchcraft. It's that separation from your spirit, like, of the people to their cultures and spirituality. That is another part of colonialism that people rarely ever talk about, is how they take the things that used to be your safe space and they turn them against you. So I remember when I first came in contact with Christianity as a child here, the first thing they taught us was you can't believe in ancestral beings because there's a verse in the Bible that says, like, there are those that talk to the dead or something. Jesus was talking to one of his disciples on the ocean or something. I forgot what the situation was, but that scripture specifically said, like, let the dead stay with the dead or whatever. Like, and that's the connotation that people used it here, and that, like, people that talk to ancestors or believe in ancestral beings are doing the devil's work. And so people stopped going to their traditional healers and safe spaces, and so they looked at the Western way of thinking about stuff. So that in itself becomes an issue, in that, like, there is no room or space for people to actually have dialogue about mental illnesses, because you're crazy. Like, if you're bringing it up, is like, do you have it or do you not have it? Are you crazy or are you not crazy? And the moment you're labeled as crazy, people can treat you differently in the community. You could lose your job, people could be violent towards you, people could, like, literally excommunicate you from situations. I know a kid that grew up in the place I'm in now. When I was a kid, like, there were two of them. One of them had a disability. The other one just couldn't talk. He literally moans the whole day when he tries to speak. And I remember how the kids would treat him, and how the parents would treat the family, just by virtue of them having those disabilities. Never asked them what the situation was, never really helped try to support the family. They just assumed that something was supernaturally wrong with them. So how do you go from that lack of understanding of what the issue is, which is a very social issue? It has nothing to do with, like, very rarely has to do anything with supernatural interventions. It's like a social issue. How do you then have empathy for that, to create health systems that support that? you know we live in a country that is run by people that came from the same beliefs, and so when they look at legislation in terms of health, they don't really think about mental health as an issue. And so the stigmas are informed historically by what we think we know about mental illnesses and mental health. The schooling system could really help. I see it's happening a lot in the States, because that's why I get a lot of my correspondence is students that are writing essays on mental health or mental illness and depression. And I'm just like mind blown. Like, you guys are writing about this stuff in class. Like, people know you're going through this. That's amazing. That's great. We don't do that here. We don't promote that kind of healthy conversation and dialogue. So the stigmas do prevail, unfortunately, because everybody is hiding in their corners, afraid to say something. We're just not speaking about it as much. I mean, the first time I spoke about my like the severity of my mental health issues with my mom was, like, what, 3 years ago. It's like, literally, we had the first proper conversation where we reflected on that moment I alluded to in the beginning of this conversation, when I called her to tell her that I can't do this anymore. She didn't really understand the extent of it.
Yeah.
It was only 3 years ago where we had this conversation, and the only reason we had that conversation is because some kid we knew took his own life, not too far from us. And I had to explain to her how very possible that is for every other boy that lives here or another girl that lives here, because of the issues that we're dealing with mentally, and nobody is sort of like giving us a space to have a conversation about it.
Yes.
I don't know what it's like for African Americans in the States, but, like, if I was to try and find a psychologist where I am right now, I'd have to literally go to the next town. That's like an hour, 30 minutes from here. Like, if you're having a panic attack and you need help, what's gonna happen? You're kind of stuck where you are with the issues you're going through. So those stigmas are then trickle down into how we deal with issues of mental health and mental illnesses, and that becomes a bigger problem in the sense. And it's not that hard to reduce stigma, to be honest with you. It's really just through education and information. people fear what they don't know, and you could find stigma in a lot of other areas. Homosexuality, I mean a homophobia is like a stigma towards somebody's sexuality. You fear something you don't know, so like you treat people differently, you other them, you might even harm them because of what your beliefs are. So yeah, I mean, so many things to deal with here on the continent. How has it been like for you guys in the States? I mean, like Black Lives Matter. We call it Black Lives Matter, but really, what we're talking about right here is like the murdering of black bodies by law
Yeah.
enforcement. Essentially what it is. And I can only imagine that's extremely traumatic for you as like as a community living in the States. How have you guys sort of like dealt with that while sort of navigating the stigmas of mental health?
Yes, so that was a topic that was very prevalent and really still is when on the series last year, because we specifically explored the George Floyd killing and or murder and its impact on Black bodies and their mental health, Black and brown bodies and their mental health. And you saw a tremendously concerning spike in anxiety and depression after the video was released, because I believe, just speaking personally and just for friends and family that watched the video, when you saw him and the complete, my goodness, expressions and just the expressions of the police officers and their just complete removal and disconcern for his screaming.
Correct.
It was disturbing. And I believe when everybody watched it, they thought of their Black brother, their dad, their uncle, and every Black male in their family that could possibly be in that same position. And I believe that really inspired a political upheaval in the States. And so you saw protests and riots because we're upset, and we are upset because this keeps happening. And you see these systems that are specifically rooted in the States that continuously show over and over that they do not care. It's just like the police officer, they'll be fine, they'll be fine. There's no sense of accountability. And it's just disturbing. So we were just upset, and we did our protests and riots. I wasn't present, but I do have friends that were present in those protests, and you saw reposts on social media because we're upset, and it keeps happening over and over. And I believe it was just now that we had one of the officers finally getting what was due, but we're still waiting for the other 3 or 4 officers to get their court date. So that's how we're approaching it here. And when it comes to mental health overall, I believe that programs are being implemented in schools to educate kids on their health risk and what depression is, what exactly is anxiety, and that's what we're going to actually explore today. After these 48 minutes that we've already been live. But let me see. I think actually this year, because we did, you had a choice of either going Launch Ed, which is virtual learning, but you're logging into the classroom that's face to face, if that makes any sense. Right. And virtual and face to face learning, which are actually in the classroom. And so we had activities intermediate through the year that were, or intermittent through the year, that you would watch a video that just explained what depression was, what suicide was, what if you had a friend that was that attempted to commit suicide, what number you had to reach, family and friends, creating that network of support if and ever you experience that. So I'm glad we're having those types of discussions and conversations, but I still think, of course, there's that stigma, because if you were to discuss it further in the classroom, it's like you make the room tense, and it's like, no, never mind. I'm not asking questions. So there's that.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for sure, and learning new things. Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine, Julius. He comes from Chicago, and he was staying here at the time in South Africa at the time. Dope photographer as well, and we're just having this conversation about like the anxiety, and I remember him just explaining to me how difficult it was for parents watching their kids leaving the house to go to work or something. It's like they never really knew if their children would come back, because like it could happen to my child today. That anxiety was so palpable. And yeah, when he was explaining that to me, I was like, I can't imagine living in a country like that or a world like that where like your entire existence could literally be erased for no reason, except apart from the fact that you possess a skin tone that the structure sort of sees as a threat in some way, so yeah, I can definitely understand what you're saying, really, as far as the anxiety goes. Like I would not be able to cope under that much stress, continuously, with the images circulating as well, to remind you every day, so yeah,
And one thing
it's a
that's
lot of work.
especially unfortunate is I saw I believe a video on a TikTok or Instagram or social media, but it was a Black father having to teach his Black son what to do if he were to be pinned on the ground, and just
Wow.
the breathing patterns, and just the same thing, what to do in the car, just having your
Wow.
hands visible, and just just narrating everything that you're going to do. My wallet's here. Can I get that, please? Just that whole thing.
Right.
That's become a necessity for Black parents.
Yeah, that's
It's
wild, man.
just
That's
it's
so wild.
unfortunate, and
Yeah.
just the putting that emphasis on when you see that video, you're thinking of he's calling for his mom, and just the expressions of the officers and just saying, okay, well, it's just
Yeah.
the lack of respect and concern, A or B, and C, just you consistently thinking of your loved ones and saying that could be him. And just
Correct.
because the images that are portrayed on social media and articles that we read and just the internet overall are just real life. And I'm saying, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
he has a hoodie, so that's just we don't,
Yeah. Exactly.
It's like
Exactly.
it's sad. But that's going to be another. I hate to keep referencing to the series, but it's just the multitude of topics that we'll be exploring this month. One being the articles of clothing that Black men wear, and how it translates, A, and B, its meaning far more than your present time and just hanging out with friends, but having that hoodie over your head meaning so much more than comfort, but what it
Yeah.
translates to the outside world, which unfortunately we just have to consider now. But
Yeah.
it's just an important topic to discuss.
Yeah.
It's
On that note, like, I must apologize for the lighting. We are in winter here, unfortunately, so it's not very consistent. Do you mind if I just try switch on the room light real quick, see if that's gonna make a difference? All right, cool.
Have fun with your hair.
Hopefully this works. Hopefully this makes a difference. Daddy playing hairdresser there, that's cool.
Yeah.
You know?
Family's all involved, you see. Oh,
Do you know what I mean? There we go.
so let me see. Let's see. Okay, so stigma in the Black experience. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so according to the Office of Minority Health of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Black Americans are about 10% more likely to experience serious mental health issues like major depression or PTSD than white Americans. Pretty crazy stat. So my question posed to you is, how may the stressors of the Black experience of your country contribute to these stats? We're actually going to explore stats of South Africa as well.
Okay. Pardon. Do you mind just repeating that question again? Sorry,
Yeah.
I missed something there. The stats part.
So how may the stressors of the Black experience, which are many, of your country contribute to these statistics saying Black Americans are about 10% more likely to experience mental health issues?
Yeah, right now, as far as I can remember, you'll have to excuse me. I read a lot of stats about mental health in this country. As right now, as things stand, I know it's every 1 in 4 person, one in 4 Black person, people will have either issues with depression or anxiety, or 1 in 6 are suicidal. Last time I checked, the the numbers are pretty grim in South Africa. I'm not gonna lie, and it's very important as well, regardless of where you are in the world. If you're looking at stats surrounding mental health, mental illnesses, suicide, you need to understand that whatever you're reading is incredibly modest, because a lot of these cases go unreported due to the aforementioned stigmas. Nobody wants to go out and talk about it. Yeah, so when I'm reading 1 in 4 in South Africa, I'm thinking, it's probably like 1 in 2. It's probably that bad. Particularly with all the tension that happens in this country, we need to also think about the other social factors that contribute to issues of mental health and mental illnesses. So when we think about issues of economical strife, we usually see even more scarier stats for males. Again, this is linked, and this is one of my research projects right now. It's also linked to gender roles within the family structure. So if you, as a quote unquote man, with the quote unquote responsibility of being the quote unquote breadwinner and the provider in your household, depending on which culture you come from, if you fail to do that, then you could see yourself finding yourself in a difficult mental state. So that's what we see historically. And I remember during the Great Depression in the States, there was a stat that came out. I don't remember what I was reading on that, but there was a stat that came out that there were more suicides amongst men during the Great Depression more than women, based on the economical issues that they could not provide for their family. So they felt like their roles, didn't matter. They're like, what am I living for? I'm a failure as a man. I couldn't do it, And so in South Africa right now, it's 1 in 4 for men and women. But like, under the current economical strife that we're experiencing, unemployment is up to 36%, if I'm not mistaken. Could be higher, actually. Could be higher than 36%. But like, it's definitely bad. But like, I think the contributing factors would be economical issues, and the political climate here has always been tense. Like, I want to say low key. Like, I don't have a better word to explain it, but like, it's always sort of bubbling under the rubble. Like, it's always with us. We always feel this tension, and also racial tensions. Like, we have a very unspoken rule here where people don't actually talk overtly about racial issues, but like, it's always in the air. Like you said, the microaggressions are there. Like, this structural exclusion is right there. So I think a lot of these things, given with the historical trauma of apartheid and how it sort of like remnants of it still exists structurally and economically, definitely huge contributors to the statistics we're seeing today. We can also talk about other health issues like obesity, which nobody talks about here, as opposed to the States, which seems to be as guys in the States, that obesity is happening so much in the States, but it's happening here as well. Nobody's talking about that at all. But like, that is another big issue that is also directly linked to mental health, and also the stresses we just spoke about right now. It's like, all these things also influence that. We also see malnutrition, not because kids aren't eating, but because like, if you're being nutritioned in a stressful environment, like, what good is that? It's not like the body works the way it does. The hormones that it secretes, like, that's how it works. If you're under stressful environments, the food that you eat might actually be bad for you, regardless of how good it's supposed to be for you. So economical, political, social, all those three. And I'll say like an alienation from your spiritual self as an African person living here, also huge. And again, don't forget, we also live in a generation that is, and I'm part of the generation too, we grew up on phones, computers, all these things. We rarely go outside to reconnect with the nature of ourselves, which is playing outside and just like really just taking in the sun and taking in the time to be self and just be at peace. So but yeah, those three, political, economical, and social aspects, which I guess social could be in any of them, definitely play a big part, massive part in all of that.
We are definitely making this conversation easy, because that is exactly what's next. But let me see. But yeah, the stress eating thing, I can definitely second, because that's just, I think, a thing of Black Americans, because the food is top notch. I mean,
yeah, I've heard
full of calories, but delicious. But that's the thing, because even I mean, when it's something traumatic has happened in the family, we immediately either turn to or food.
Yeah.
Or, and it's good to find other outlets, like you were saying, just simply going outside. And that's what I've gotten into just not like recently, is just seeing those sunsets and just sitting outside and just breathing. Because it's so easy to just, I can go like 12 hours on this thing.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, wait a second, I've been on here since 7 a.m. this morning. So
Right.
exactly. Like, let me get out and, just look through the neighborhood, look at the sky, and just be grateful for that. Be in the moment for a second. So that's definitely something. And just finding or exercising.
Yeah, 100%. Dude, I do yoga every morning. Like I'm about that life.
Take a walk.
Take a walk, yeah.
I know that's not something our generation is down for. Like, I'll take this. No.
Yeah, I'll take that.
But
Gotta do it.
I know. So now there's the history of the stigma, right? So we have many experts at this point pointing to high rates of poverty due to historical racism, as you were speaking of, and income inequality as major contributors to mental illness and distress in Black communities. So though that's a, again, larger topic in itself, we'll explore just the general information, but that's good to know. So going back to the stigma, for those that don't know, those not of color, simply you are of color and just don't know, that surround mental health in Black and brown communities, it can trace back to, let me have you guess, just comment, just guess.
Start with the C, yo. Start with the C.
Boom!
I think I'm good at this. I'm really good at this game.
We were seen then as unsophisticated if we were to seek medical care, which only transformed in the later ages as you'd be crazy if you were to seek care or get aid from a therapist or medical professional. And then you'd just be making the feel of the room tense if you were to have the conversation about your diagnosis or about medical records around family and friends. But do you all notice the pattern with this at all? We're so considerate of others at the sacrifice of the improvement of our mental health, which then we're just contributing directly to the stigma. So what does that mean? Part of the problem. You not seeking that care, that treatment, that aid from a medical professional, you're simply elongating the process, right? So, and if you don't believe me, there's a stat one from South Africa and one from the US. One reading here, let me see. Okay, so psychiatric, let me actually add this here. Yeah, so psychiatric stigma was found to be perpetuated by family members, friends, employers, community members, and healthcare providers. And causes of the stigma identified include misconceptions about mental illness, often leading to delays in help seeking. Experiencing psychiatric stigma was reported to worsen the health of service users and impede their capacity to lead and recover a normal life. And that can be found in the Psychiatric Stigma and Discrimination in South Africa Perspectives from Key Stakeholders. So you all can read more on that. Furthermore, we have some stats from the US where you can read Black and African American providers who are known to give more appropriate and effective care to Black and African help seekers make up a very small portion of the behavioral health provider workforce. And because of these factors and even more, Black and African American people are more likely to experience chronic and persistent rather than episodic mental health conditions. Yet hope for recovery should remain as light is shed on these issues, and the general public can hold accountable policymakers and health systems. But regardless, you all see this pattern. You all are so considerate of your audience, of your family members, of what they're going to say, of what they're going to think, of what your friends and teachers and educators and peers are going to think, that you're sacrificing the improvement of your mental health. So with that said, throw away those notions and get help. I know it's a lot easier said than done. But then again, at the end of this, we can provide documents for therapists in both online and face-to-face, free resources, along with these articles here, case studies that show the stats, right? Because when I say I was in your place when it comes to therapy. It's like, if I go there, I'm crazy. Like, I don't need help. You may not. And that's okay. But it's good to talk it out. As my mom says, unpack it. Because if you don't, you just get, what's it called? Oh my goodness. Layers. This month has been crazy and I will not go into depth. But my dad has his own diagnosis, right? And what we've learned from the whole experience is layers. It starts early. It starts now, y'all. We're teens. Those little small experiences that bother you, that, poke and prod at you, that you just pack down. It builds up and up and up and up. But by your 20s or 30s, you say, "Oh my God, well that still hurts." So start now. Get it out. Tsoku, what can you say about that? And just unpacking it early.
I agree with that. I really do agree with that. I think also I'd like to get into a little bit of language real quick, because I think one of the biggest, when it comes to stigma, particularly, we need to think about like public social stigma and self stigma as well. So you've addressed the issue of social stigma, and of personal stigma. Personal stigma is when you stigmatize yourself. Basically, it's like, okay, cool, I've been diagnosed with manic depression. I don't know what that means, but I've heard terrible things about it. So I guess I'm not a fit enough human to hang out with the cool kids, or to have a boyfriend, or to even go on vacation with my friends, because what if I have this episode? So you stigmatize yourself and you internalize your world, and then that stops you from actually reaching out to anybody. Even if somebody does reach out to you and say, "Hey, do you want to talk about it?" Might take you a while. Whereas like the public stigma is other people outside of yourself telling you other things and stigmatizing you, which you've also touched on there. And the other thing with language I'd like to get into is mental health versus mental illness. People tend to conflate the two terms, that mental health and mental illness the same thing. It's in fact not the same thing. They do speak toward they do speak towards the same thing, but like they are not the same thing. The best way I can explain mental health versus mental illness for anybody in layman's terms to remember easily is that everyone on this planet Earth, including infants who can't articulate themselves, deal with mental health, because mental health has to do with other things like your sociability. Like, are you happy with yourself, your life, your self-esteem? Like, are you eating healthy, are you taking care of yourself? Versus mental illness, which is then like something that is diagnosed based on the prolonged living with a poor state of mental health, where you can then get a mental illness. It's almost like the same thing with physical health and physical illness. So it's like thinking about those things could actually help you understand your situation. So you can have poor mental health and not have a mental illness. Do you know what I mean? So it's like you can be in a poor state of mental health. Like you could have a couple of bad days, or a week or a month, where like you're just down in a rut and you can't do anything. But you're not eating right, you're not exercising, you've been isolated for too long, you're not reaching your life goals, or you don't see a clear pathway on how to reach your life goals. So you become kind of like frustrated, and you're in this poor state of mental health where you're not addressing any of these things that are making you feel bad. But the longer you stay with that, you might, maybe a year into it, 6 months into it depends, maybe you might get to a place where you're diagnosed with depression, because you've been in this state for so long that your physiology and your biology has acclimatized to that state of being. But there are other people that have had mental illnesses since they were young. We know about these things, but like behind every story of mental illness, there is a story of trauma. And there's so much literature to show this now, that there's a story of trauma. Something starts this whole conversation of like, this child has a mental illness, ADHD or whatever. If you guys are interested in learning more about ADHD and what that actually is in the new science, I would recommend this physician called Dr. Gabor Mate. I'll put the name in the chat. He's got some very interesting opinions on ADHD, which is one of the biggest diagnoses in the States for children. That it's actually not in itself a mental illness in itself. It's like a response to stressful environments, and that's how kids cope with stressful environments, by going into this hypermania state of like doing multiple things and whatever, like they can't focus. But I do agree with the idea that we need to sort of deal with it early on, and it's this understanding of mental illness versus mental health where we can actually start dealing with it earlier, because most people don't look for help based on the idea that they think they have a mental illness. So they don't want to be labeled as something that a mental illness. But if they understood that this happens to almost anyone, mental health wise, then you will happily go to a psychologist and get help. You know what I'm saying? You want to avoid getting a mental illness. You want to get as much help as you can. It's also very helpful if you have support systems around you. Some people don't have those things. Some people live in an environment where it's constantly toxic, it's constantly negative, so they don't have the best support systems around them. The environments is the antagonist to their mental health and their mental illnesses. So it's very difficult for those people to get out and get help. But if you do have the option to reach out and get help in any way, please do. There's so many people out here that are giving information. There's so many platforms that are trying to reach out. In South Africa, we have two in particular that are giving out like free counseling services as well. You can do it telephonically. You don't have to be there physically. So yeah, the sooner the better. Like for sure, like your mental health could become a mental illness, as an issue. You definitely can sort of like stop that situation from happening just by like finding spaces where you can have an outlet. And if you don't have an outlet, this I guess goes back to the conversation of art and well-being. It's like if you have a different outlet where you practice something. I see a lot of people are getting into sketching, some people are getting into running, some people are getting into yoga, some people are getting into reading, like whatever outlet you have. Even journaling, something as old as journaling, like journaling your emotions on a daily basis. You'd be surprised just how much you can get out of your system by just writing it down and maybe giving space for yourself to reflect on all those things. So yeah, I agree with you. Sooner the better. Deal with it if you can.
Deal with it. I know it's a lot easier said than done, but just do it.
Get it. Yeah.
Like, please, pretty.
You're not alone, man. You're not alone. We love you out here. We're trying to help you. We're trying to make sure that you're living a good life. So go for it. Go for it.
Yes. And now for our impacts, and then we'll get into solutions. Impacts of this nasty stigma. Y'all, of course, not y'all. I won't say y'all. People are abandoning treatment, right? So stigma and healthcare barriers often result in missed opportunities for care. So about 25% of Black Americans seek mental health care compared to 40% of white people, according to the National Association on Mental Illness. But this absence of treatment has become a norm instead of the exception across the continent. So the treatment gap, or the proportion of people with mental illness who don't get treatment, ranges from 75% in South Africa to more than 90% in Ethiopia and Nigeria. Okay, so stigma and judgment is what prevents Black or African Americans from seeking treatment for their mental illness. And what's worse is mental health, because you just talked, so get it together. Mental health has historically been neglected on Africa's health and development policy agenda. Yeah. So what can you tell us about that? I know you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like I can't go into too much detail as I don't really have all the information about other African countries, but yeah, 100%. I think in the beginning of this conversation, I alluded to the fact that like we don't really have a lot of those in that protection. I mean, there is a law in South Africa, I know, even though it's kind of just like I'm not really sure what it does, because one of the biggest we've had so many human rights violations in South Africa historically. Like, you feel free to Google if you want to what happened during apartheid, even post-apartheid, Sharpeville. Post-apartheid, we had Marikana. We had so many crazy things that have happened in this country, but like the biggest human rights violation to date is a mental health issue, which was like in 2012, was it, when about, if I'm not mistaken, 110 or 94 mentally ill patients were left to die based due to negligence, and there was no protection for them based as far as legislation goes, but the state had to settle because all eyes were on them in that situation. They had to settle publicly. But like the fact that 94 people could die under the watch of the caretakers, I'm talking starvation here, like it's terrible situations. It just kind of shows you that like we're not thinking about it as a serious issue. And if I could just get into the issue of other reasons why Africans may be reluctant to taking medication, which is care seeking, even like going out to get care. I mean, besides stigma, there are other social issues that come into play when we look at the role governments have played in the lives of African people. There's just this level of distrust between a lot of African people and the government, and I'm talking not just African government, but like government from the States or like England. We've spoken about colonialism already, so there's just so much reason for people not to trust these colonial powers historically. So they, when it comes to taking medication come from them, there's always this idea of conspiracy that like maybe this is to dumb down the African public. And we see the same issue with the COVID, for example, vaccinations. We are seeing a similar ideology. We saw the same issue with SARS when it broke out. So there's always that tension, that power tension that people forget when it comes to issues of care seeking and caregiving. You know, some people don't know how to deal with mental illnesses because they have not been trained adequately how to deal with psychological issues. So you have issues like in other countries. What country is it that I'm thinking about? Is it Angola or Congo? I don't remember. But they have these churches. Some of them have no structure, actually. You just sit outside, where they tie people to trees or handcuff them if they're mentally ill, and they pray for them. Literally all day, they just, soiling themselves in their own, urine and feces, like literally just living. And like, I'm sorry if that's too harsh of a language for this channel, but literally, like, it's inhuman. It's inhuman the way people are treated because there's a lack of understanding of what mental illnesses are. So like, until medical anthropologists can be brought in to actually help government understand the social impacts and how to deal with issues of mental health and mental illnesses, then we are continuously going to have these issues where people are not taking medication and not even receiving treatment at all, So there's just so much work to do from a social perspective, so much work to do. Bringing awareness to it is just one step in like 1,000. But it's the biggest one. It's the biggest one because if we can bring awareness to it, then it eventually will get to places where people can actually do something about it. But there's just so much to do right now.
There is, but you made a great point saying this is the first step, because once y'all know, then you can do something about it. And again, we're all about tangible solutions, and I know we're going to touch on it at the end, but it's just my favorite part. So you all, it's broken into, of course, self-care and then community action. So how if you want to get in contact, pardon me, Lord, I'm messing, with policymakers and actually hold these health systems accountable, whether it be sending an email, written letter, etc., then the plate is open to you. So if you are interested, then feel free to DM at Shea Lanin. I'll put that on the bottom here. And you can get that doc emailed to you. All right. But to briefly touch on that mistrust, the medical establishment, Lord have mercy, of America, has a very long history of mistreating Black Americans. And what's most notable is the story of Henrietta Lacks. And it's ranged from gruesome experiments on enslaved people to the forced sterilizations of Black women. And the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study that withheld treatment from hundreds of Black men for decades, only to just let doctors track the course of the disease. So it's not surprising at all that 42% of Black Americans in November said they'd be willing to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Less than half of Black Americans in this country. So that's understandable. And I'm glad you even mentioned that because it stretches far more than the stigma. But again, this is the first step. So educating yourself, becoming aware of what the stigma is, the mistrust that exists between these medical systems and yourself, or just Black Americans in general, is important. And you can make the decision on your own. It's really up to you. And now for the top three. So these trends of impacts when it comes to mental health, the stigma, etc., is often compounded by three factors. Ignorance about the extent of mental health problems, the stigma, ding, 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 against those living with mental illness, which is what we touched on earlier, and then mistaken beliefs that mental illness cannot be treated or can be treated through prayer alone, which is what we'll elaborate on now. So, and this is exactly what you touched on. That's why I said you are the best panelist. Goodness gracious. But so in ancient Greece, a stigma was a brand to mark slaves or criminals, right? For millennia, society did not treat persons suffering from depression, autism, schizophrenia, and other mental illnesses much better than slaves or criminals. And they were imprisoned, tortured, or killed. During the Middle Ages, mental illness was regarded as a punishment from God, and sufferers were thought to be possessed by the devil and were burned at the stake or thrown in penitentiaries and madhouses where they were chained. Pretty intense. During the Enlightenment, the mentally ill were finally freed from their chains and institutions and were established to help sufferers of mental illness. However, that stigma reached an unfortunate peak during the Nazi reign in Germany. Hundreds of thousands of mentally ill people were murdered or sterilized. So then there's that belief that involves prayer, which is supported in the Conversation article explaining Black Americans' use of the church as a buffer. So that's what I'll put here. Let's see. Yes. Okay. So we know that mental health issues were deemed a vice of the devil, and the solution typically was prayer and stronger faith. And what I would like to say about that is when it comes to at least my loved one's diagnosis, prayer is very important, and it's a great way to cope and to be in line with the higher God, right? However, prayer alone cannot treat mental illness, right? Prayer and prescriptions, as we hinted at the beginning here.
Right.
So so prayer and prescriptions. So what we'll touch on here is how Black churches can do better in supporting and educating their audience on mental illness and the stigma and how they can ask for help. So it was actually refreshing to hear that let me start here. It is refreshing to hear when a faith leader admits or at least explains to their audience that prayer isn't alone enough for mental illness. Because Black women, especially actually now in 2020 and 2021, were at the forefront of this task. So Minister Kelly Warford and Minister Monique Tarver are both working on this language and stigma surrounding mental health in Black churches. And not only are they being transparent with their own struggles, but they're working to change the conversation about mental health in the Black church community. So changing that conversation begins with making statements like mental health issues are as common as physical ones and should not be demonized, but rather treated in the same manner as physical health issues. 1. 2, struggling with mental health does not mean that you lack faith. The emphasis on that one. Struggling with mental health does not mean that you lack faith. As a church, 3, as a church, we are here to support and uplift in accordance with our faith. Okay? And so our hope here is that this work will inspire others to keep pushing that stigma out of Black churches and even further from the church so it can become a valuable resource for those who struggle with their mental health. And by recognizing that faith is not a substitute for care, and by providing resources that actually can help, churches might even see a return of their Black audience who were once told that they lack faith. Okay? That's going to be an important topic that we will also include in the doc and that you can share with your church as well. Now, how we will end this is I would love for you, Tsoku. I've taken like little pieces, not pieces, but oh my gosh, select images of your abstract pieces exhibit. And I'd love for you to just explain your inspiration for each one.
For each image, or like, sure. I mean, we could get into it. I mean, all the answers might be the same. It might just be like I was very depressed during the time, but we can get into the nuances of the images. What I was trying to navigate. We can do that for sure.
Perfect. Let me find it here. Let's go with this one here. Let us know.
Beleaguered. Yeah, that's beleaguered. I think that's what it is. If you look at the entire series, really, what you're seeing is me at different states of like my experience with depression and anxiety, and also like being isolated. So every single image, like on a different day, just shows a different experience. Yeah, and this one, beleaguered, literally speaks to the idea where like on days where you see a little bit of hope to get out, which unfortunately depression is very seductive in selling you dreams at the same time while taking them all away. The image we see flying umbrellas in this very hyper like surreal world that I've created, but the character's umbrella is unfortunately submerged in the water, and it's a little bit harder to turn it into the direction which will then take him out of the water. And at the same time, he's surrounded by these ominous looking creatures. We will assume they're sharks. We don't know what they are, but they're surrounding him, and he just wants to get out. So it's like it's a moment of panic while offering you a moment of hope. It's If you look at the works, like I always give the audience a sense of choice. If you like, what would you do in this situation? Like I've already given you a hint on what will work, but like like you said, it's easier said than done, right? Like it's easier said than done, like following the solutions that you're given to help with your mental health and your mental illnesses. And that's precisely what the image is trying to show, is like what you're supposed to do, which is like try to turn the umbrella the other way with all your might and all your strength, but for some reason you just can't do it. So it's a bit of a cliffhanger, like what happened to this character? Did he eventually do it? Did he not? We'll never know. I guess it's up to you as a character, but that's kind of what I was trying to navigate through there.
Storytelling at its finest.
I do try my best.
Yeah.
A brief reminder of solitude. Yeah, this was also taken in my bedroom at the time. Like I was in Cape Town. What I did, abstract pieces. Like I just need to make a note that a lot of these images were taken indoors. Besides the one that you just showed me now, I took that pool at my sister's house. But this one was in my bedroom. This is a brief reminder of solitude, and this one comes back to me a lot because I'm still learning from it to this day. I often think of like, well, I used to think of solitude as loneliness back in the day, especially when you're incredibly socially anxious. And depression has this funny way of just making you sit indoors and alienate yourself from the public. And you spend so much time with yourself. So in spending time with yourself, you see the other self, your other self, which is what the rose is supposed to resemble in this case. The other self that is still full of life, that is still full of hope, that's still full of like dreams and goals. But at the same time, you have to deal with the other self, which is going through this predicament, like this experience of being depressed and not really understanding how it's hijacking all of your cognitive functions. Like you're trying to reach out to yourself, but you're not reaching at the same time. So like this is the one time where like being in solitude is actually being loneliness, because you're disconnected from yourself, type of thing.
Yes. And here.
Yeah, Sariti, this one is very popular in the States. What's going on there? Like everybody that knows me talks to me about this. So Sariti, in my native language of Sepedi, basically means aura, or like a sense of being. If I was to meet you in person, like I'm sure you've had this with other people, where you've met somebody, and without saying a word to you, you could sort of like pick up on their vibe and their energy and sense of self. Like you're like, oh, something is off with this person, something is really awesome with this human. So Siriti is that. It's your aura, it's your energy, it's your sense of self. And there were just some days where, like, being depressed, incredibly depressed, you felt like you lost all sense of that. Like you didn't have a sense of self at all. Like there's a quote that I like. There's a little thing I wrote along with this one I made when I shot it. Is like, I forgot what I said precisely, but there was a line that says like, I could literally walk into a room and the flowers would die, type of thing. Like that is the sense that is the new aura that you're carrying. Like you're so toxic that if somebody was to open you up, all you'd have is just this negative vibe coming out of you. And that's what the smoke is supposed to be. It's so toxic, you can't breathe. And by opening yourself up, you can intoxicate other people in a negative way. So that's how I felt at the time, that my aura was so bad and so negatively charged. And also alluding to the idea of being bewitched, or being crazy in the terms of African context, same vibe there. So yeah, that's what I was trying to do with this image. Like the hands, like you'll see with the hands, people ask me about the hands all the time. So prayer hands go up, yeah, and then these ones are going down. So like it's the opposite of hopeful and prayerful and looking up. You're actually looking down. That you feel closer to your sense of hate and the devil, if we can call it that. Like you feel lower than higher, you know. So there's also a religious aspect in that. I also do play with geometry in my images. I do like numerology. So if the hands were going up, we're talking about a pyramid. If the head was there, we're talking about a pyramid that goes up, like, you know, spirituality, like third eye waking up. But in this case, you don't have that Godhead figure. You are actually down, you know. And I think that's a very cool, I don't know, way to sort of talk about like religion and, you know, churches and mental health and mental illness, because I come from a very Christian family as well.
Mhm.
And we have the same issues where we don't really address issues of mental health in terms of like spirituality or anything. Whereas like for me, it was an integral part of the healing process to be able to tap into that conversation, you know, and to be able to show it in the images itself. You'll see this with other works that I do that don't really directly speak to mental health and mental illnesses, but
Mhm.
like the sense of being as a person, being a whole person. You will see all these motifs coming back and forth. But yeah, Seriti means aura for those who are interested. And yeah, that's basically what the image is talking about, like your sense of being literally being changed and your identity being changed by your experience with mental illnesses.
Sweet. And you give your audience choice, right?
Yeah, all the time. I try my best to anyway.
I would have thought this was like anxiety at the highest pinpoint. That's what I took.
Right.
That's something your girl suffers from. But
Yeah, I feel it.
it's just a thought, a thinking overload. You're just like, whoa, and then that's
Yeah.
what I took it as. But
I mean, it could be that as well. That's the beauty of the series. Yeah, like when I shared it, I was like, this is not my work anymore. It belongs to whoever gets it, really, because
oh my
that's your
goodness.
experience with mental illnesses are going to be subjective. The way you see the images based on the way you feel, that's how you communicate it. And that's one of the biggest reasons I'm a huge advocate of creating visual languages based on, I was talking about language barriers earlier.
Mhm.
This is a visual language. Photography is a visual language where we can express issues of the mind without actually having to use English or any other language. You see the image, you can already articulate an experience that is maybe not so good. And
Mhm.
that's how we get people to talk about this stuff. This is how I explained my depression to my mom, by the way, using these images. She didn't really get what I was saying in English, but when she saw this, she was just like, if this is how you were feeling, it's not good. You know, it's
Right.
definitely not good, you know. um so yeah, I mean, I'm glad thank you for sharing your experience and your interpretation of the image. There's no right or wrong way to interpret these images. Like the way you feel and your experience with mental health, if it shows up in this image, then that's how it is for you. You know what I mean?
Yes. My goodness. Well, we'd love to see y'all's interpretation. So feel free to comment. Let us know your thoughts. And how about this one?
Yeah, I think this one was like a continuation of like Brief Reminder of Solitude. This was supposed to be sort of, excuse me, just a young burp there. Yeah, just a continuation of like the story is like, again, now you're within reach of something that is beautiful, like something that is also, it's so there's three images in the series: oxen, Brief Amount of Solitude, and this one, Plastic Roses. So it's like you're within reach of something beautiful, but there's always something holding you back. You know, like you can see the wool wrapped around his mouth. You can see his eyes are literally tight shut. You can't open them. So there's this beauty around you, but you can't articulate it. You can't see it. You know, but you can reach out and touch it if you so wish to. But that's again up to you what you're gonna do in this situation. All I've done is set up the scene. How you play it out is completely up to you. And I think in Oxen we see the flower head off the stem, and his face is covered with the wool. So again, it's just a continuation of that idea of reaching out to yourself.
Now, why is his head red?
Pardon?
Oh, I was wondering, why is his head red?
Oh yeah, so yeah, I get asked these questions a lot with my color schemes and like the colors I use and motifs. So um colors in my spiritual and cultural beliefs, they're ways of speaking to different frequencies, and also gods in a way, or like like in my culture we use a lot of red for a lot of different things, right?
Mhm.
um so like the face paint as well isn't just an aesthetic. My name Tsoku actually is a short version of something called Litsoku, which is like a clay, a pigment clay that that we use in traditional practices. Whether that's you can actually use it for your skin to glow up if you're interested. That stuff works. But like you'll see women and men adorning it for spiritual practices, for spiritual healing ceremonies, or like just to appease the ancestors. So I try to use the same sort of like pigmentation. I'm not gonna go into detail as to what the colors mean, but like I use the same sort of pigmentations and color schemes to give thanks to the spiritual journey that comes as part of mental health. And the reason I do that is because sometimes when you're having a spiritual awakening, and this is other conversation about the spirituality of mental illnesses, is sometimes when you're having a spiritual awakening, which I believe I was going through during this time, you do manifest symptoms of what can be perceived in a Western way as mental illnesses, right? So my
Mhm.
sister, for the longest time, was arguing that I actually don't have a mental illness, but that I was actually just having a spiritual awakening. In the West, they might call it the dark night of the soul. More
Mhm.
than welcome to look that up. So she was always like she told me that the reason I used these colors at the time, because I was channeling so much, was that like I was getting messages from my own ancestors to let me know that like I'm on the right path and that like I'm doing the right things or whatever. So
Mhm.
some of these images I'm still coming to grips with myself, because like the knowledge that I find in them is way beyond my understanding sometimes, as I get them in dreams a lot of the times, and my unconscious when I'm meditating. But yeah, just a little anecdote of what the color schemes and the painting historically means for me as an African person. Like this is like touching base with our history as a people. It's not just an aesthetic.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And this last one here.
Rediscover, not recreate. This image, yeah. So this image, if I'm not sure, like it was being broadcasted on a couple of buildings in the States, as part of an initiative, a racial justice collection recently. Actually, we finished in New York a couple of like a week or so ago. So rediscover, not recreate is essentially what the title says. I think when we think about, when we talk about issues of like mental health and mental illnesses, particularly for Black people, again, this conversation has touched on how we always look at like westernized ways of dealing with it,
Yes.
but I've found so much value, and there's so many other people that have spoken on this, in going back to your history to rediscover your story, where you come from, before you can understand where you are and where you're going. And it's within those stories where we find a lot of healing. Like I know with my manic depression, where I found a lot of healing is in going back to understanding how my ancestors were dealing with issues of mental illnesses and mental health, what spiritual issues they were dealing with at the time and how they dealt with them. It's in that conversation where I found my healing more than I did from taking um pills for depression or anything. I'm not saying the pills don't work. I'm just saying for me it wasn't the
Yes.
solution. So rediscover, create really is about rediscovering yourself, your story, who you are, where you come from, instead of trying to mold yourself into the perfect image of what you're supposed to be in society. It's the conversation between persona and shadow self type of thing. It's like rediscover self, get to know yourself, and that's the hard thing to do. Getting to know yourself is a very difficult thing, because you have to denounce certain truths that you thought you knew about yourself or the world,
Yes.
in order to just settle for what is actually real and what is happening. So some people have told me about this image is like, why do you use white paint? Are you talking about racial double consciousness? Again, that is up to it's up to you to describe it the way you want to describe it.
Mhm.
But like for me, it was just literally about like finding the layers we spoke about as well, like finding, like uncovering yourself layer by layer and working through yourself until you arrive to a place where you feel comfortable to say, I've arrived, this is who I am, or at least I know where I'm going. And the reason I use the paintbrush is because my way of rediscovering self, again, is through the arts. So
Yeah.
that's why I use the paintbrush then. It's a big paintbrush. It's not one you'd use to make anything artistic, really, but over exaggeration always works.
Yes. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I just wanted to recognize your work, as that is the topic of our episode here, art, the healing power of art, and re-emphasize something you had said in an interview, saying depression isn't all doom and gloom, but rather an opportunity to face oneself. And this is a result, pardon me, of going to places you hate the most about yourself and finding beauty. And that is
Correct.
exactly how we will introduce the solutions for today. So let me see. Okay, so in regards to education, as there is, at least on this platform, no such thing as ignorance because you're learning now. So you'll get the recording of this episode both on YouTube, and if you'd like the actual recording, then you can DM again at Shea Lanin on Instagram, SHEA.Lanin, LANIN. And when it comes to facing yourself and going to the places you hate, we'll provide you with the doc to online and face-to-face therapy resources, if you would like. And when it comes to finding beauty, we have self-care packages.
Nice.
For the most engaged commenter. So we'll check that later today. And we will let you know on Instagram. And lastly, bold action, as we mentioned earlier in today's episode. If you'd like to challenge some policymakers up in Florida or anywhere in the States or South Africa, hey, we may have some viewers. I don't know. Or maybe challenge some health systems, hold them accountable. Then we'll have a doc there too. And again, you can DM Shea Lanin on IG. Thank you, Tsoku. And we'll actually put your links on the page now.
Oh, cool. Thank you. It's very kind of you. Appreciate it. We are currently, the reason there's a /story is because we're running a fundraiser for like I've already said, like I got accepted to do my master's in London this September in medical anthropology. It will be on a partial scholarship, meaning that like my tuition will be covered. But unfortunately, like I need to raise money for my living situation for that year, and living in London is quite expensive. So we are running a 30% discount on all art pieces in the art store until August 15th, I believe. So we're trying to raise about £12,000 to go to London, so we can do this medical anthropology thing and come back and challenge these policymakers and tell them what's what. You know what I mean? So yeah, thank you so much for sharing the links down there. Appreciate it so much.
Of course, support him, y'all. Support Black excellence, please, 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 please.
Let's go. Yes, please.
You got his email, the link to his store, to his Instagram, and to his website. All right. We love you all, and have a wonderful, wonderful Wednesday.
Cool.